Hello, this is HT Wingnut, back with part 2 of the Asus UX430UN laptop review. And I just want to touch on a couple of things from last time. I did note about the underneath this panel here, about that thermal pad. That thermal pad I thought was for the CPU. Apparently it is for the SSD. That being said, I did remove it and replace it with a better thermal pad, a little bit thicker as well, and I also placed one on top of the GPU and the CPU, and remarkably the temperatures, now a lot of the heat is transferred to this aluminum plate. You can see here though that there's this plastic barrier here, which I'm going to probably fuss with, see if I can get that off of there. Obviously the good part is that you will have improved thermals for the CPU and GPU, and I do see it still reaches the peak temperature limit on this GPU of 7374C, but it seems like it holds clocks better for a longer period. Somebody had a question about the PWM on this display. The only thing I had found to check for it easily is if you have a 60 Hertz camera, and on my phone it does have 60 Hertz. So I'm going to go ahead and give this a try. Apparently if you go real quick, if you see any streaking or lines running across the screen, that looks good. This is at full brightness. I go down, say 75% brightness. I guess you get a little bit of that flickering. I think my phone automatically compensates for that though, so that's why it goes away. I'm going to go down again to about 50% brightness. Let me get that. And go down again, basically to 0%. Not 0%, but the lowest brightness. Yeah, you can definitely see that. So I guess that may be a concern if you are sensitive to PWM flickering. The other thing I wanted to show you, I'm going to go ahead and turn the brightness all the way back up, is that before I showed that there is a USB-C type port right there. There we go. There's the port. And I did get a cable that has USB-C and DisplayPort on the other end because I have this Acer 4K LCD. Geez, I have to back up quite a ways because it's pretty big. It's an Acer 4K 60 Hertz panel. G-Sync panel actually, but since the system doesn't support G-Sync, it won't be supported. But go ahead and plug this into the USB-C port. It takes two hands and then going around to the back. Go ahead and plug this in the... There we go, just like that. Okay. I plugged that in, and it automatically switched over. So I was using it before. And go ahead and look at screen resolution, Intel graphics settings, display. Hopefully this, let me get closer, that way it focuses better. Display. You can see here 3840 by 2160 at 59 Hertz. Just so you know, I did have this at 60 Hertz originally, and the screen would occasionally blank out. I don't know if it's the cable or maybe it's just sensitive at that frequency, I don't know, but at 59 Hertz it's been rock stable so far. So just so you know, it does support 4K 60 Hertz through that when there's the USB 3.1 port. The cable, you know, you can get on Amazon or wherever else for just I don't know, I think it was $5 or $6 for the cable. So there you go. Hope that information is helpful if you're interested in connecting to a 4K LCD. Okay, here we are on the desktop of the Asus UX430UN, and before we get started here, I'm going to go ahead and run through the basic specs of the system really quickly. CPU is an i7-855U, 1.8 GHz to 4 GHz, 4-core, 8-thread, 15-watt TDP, KB like R. Well, it's a mouthful. With the integrated Intel Graphics 620. GPU is a Nvidia GeForce MX150 with its own dedicated 2 gigs of GDDR5 video RAM at 6000 MHz. It does use Nvidia Optimus switching technology. Has 16 gigs of LPDDR3 dual channel 1866 MHz RAM. I want to make a quick note that CPU, GPU, and RAM is all soldered onto the system mainboard. So if you order one of these things, you're going to want to get it with as much RAM and the fastest CPU you think you're going to need, because they are not changeable. GPU, you only have the one option. So storage is swappable. It does come with a typical M.2 slot. It's a SATA slot, 80 millimeter form factor. This specific machine comes with a 512 gig M2 SanDisk X400 SATA SSD. I did swap it with a 1 terabyte Samsung 850 EVO M2 SATA SSD, and that worked just fine, so that is a possibility. LCD is a 14-inch IPS 1920 by 1080p matte non-touch. It does come with an 802.11 Intel wireless card. Has a chiclet keyboard with white backlight, multi-touch touchpad with fingerprint sensor, 50 watt-hour battery, and a 65 watt power adapter. It is a wall wart adapter. Dimensions, it's only 0.63 inches in height and 2.76 pounds, so it is thin and light. Ports, you have 3 USB. One is a Type-C USB 3.1 Gen 1. It says with support for external display. I did order a dongle for USB 3.1 to HDMI as well as to DisplayPort, so I'm going to give that a go when those arrive. It does have a Type-A USB 3.1 Gen 1 and a Type-A USB 2.0, which I'm assuming they'll want people to use for wireless dongle for their mouse, keyboard, whatever, because it's not the highest throughput for data transfer. Micro HDMI, a combo audio jack for headphone and microphone, and SD card reader. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through HW Info 64 here and kind of run down the specs and go through each of the components in detail. As we saw, the i7-8855U CPU, it is a quad core with hyper-threading, so up to 8 threads, and it is a 15 watt TDP, and it seems to run, you can see right now in the CPU number 0 here, it's running at about 4 gigahertz at idle. When loaded up like a CPU type benchmark or encoding or rendering or whatever, it'll drop down to 2.5 to 3 gigahertz, somewhere in there, when it's 100% loaded. So it is a little bit limited in that respect, but still it's pretty decent. For gaming, it does stick around above 3 gigahertz, so it seems to be decent. And because games typically only run at about 40 to 60% CPU load, if that. Many of them aren't even coded for more than 2 or 3 threads anyway, so not a problem there. So what we'll do is we're going to go ahead and load up Intel Extreme Tuning Utility. This machine does support Intel Extreme Tuning Utility. I won't go into detail here, but I'm going to let you know that you can undervolt it. I didn't gain a whole lot of temperature improvement by undervolting for gaming, but for doing like a W prime or a Cinebench type stress benchmark, at 100% CPU load, it did lower that by a little bit. But what I found worked more was those thermal pads that I showed you, and I don't have all the benchmarking done for that, so that's going to have to come at a later time if I do it at all, but that's something to consider. I did adjust the TDP, the boost power max, so that I get a more consistent clock speed, and it didn't spike and then thermal throttle and spike thermal throttle. Said it would power limit throttle, and but it would be a more consistent clock speed there. So just so you know, this is a free download from Intel, and if you're up for it, you can go ahead and try to undervolt yourself or adjust the TDPs and maybe improve your thermals a little bit better. Or if nothing else, like I did, maintain a more consistent clock frequency. Let's see here, going on from there. Motherboard, I don't think we even know it's an Asus motherboard. Memory, you can see here it's running at 933 while it's bouncing around. It does underclock itself when it's idle, but 933 megahertz is double pump, so it's 1866 megahertz. See the timings there, 10, 10, 10, 28, 1T. And I think for the specific CPU, I don't think 1866 megahertz is really going to hurt performance in any way, shape, or form. Bus we don't care about. Video adapter. Intel UHD Graphics 620. That's the integrated that the system's going to run on typically, like your Windows desktop or whatever. But then you have your GeForce MX150, which you can manually configure to run with your games, or it should be kind of default to that. I still find that I have to go into the Nvidia control panel, as you see I'm doing here, and under Program Settings, find the executable in this list, or go ahead and add it yourself, and then I just manually select the high performance Nvidia processor. Make sure that the game is closed when you do this, so this will only take effect when you start up the game. So if the game is already running, you do this, it's not going to work. So, but Nvidia's Optimus has been around for a while, so maybe you're familiar with it. For those that aren't, that's a quick and dirty roundabout way to use that. This GPU is plenty capable for gaming. You're not going to be playing, 1080p, 100 FPS or anything like that. You will be gaming, 720p, 40 to 60 FPS, medium to high settings on most games. You can run 1080p on many of the recent games as well if you lower the settings by a little bit. So it's up to your preference. So it is gaming capable. And which reminds me, the one problem with show you in GPU-Z. Okay, good, it's running. We'll go through GPU-Z details real quick right here. MX150, doesn't look like they have the details yet in GPU-Z for it, but obviously sub-vendor Asus, 384 shaders, 23.5 gigapixels per second fill rate, 47 gigatexels per second texture fill rate, 64-bit bus width with GDDR5 RAM, 2 gigs of that, and you can see here, if we go ahead and start this render test, we can look at the sensors, and it'll show you, okay, we're running at the 1645 megahertz. See, perf cap reason is voltage, but eventually you'll get where you see this purple here, it says thermal. Now if you look in NVIDIA Inspector, there is a lock on the thermal limit of this GPU of 74C only. You can try to adjust it, it'll just bounce back to 0, or bounce back to 74 under. You can go lower, nope, doesn't work that way. So unfortunately you're limited by the GPU temperature. You can overclock it, but it doesn't gain you anything because of the thermal limit again. So you can crank this up as high as you want. Well, it'll probably lock up, because it'll try to reach that real quick and then lock up. But it'll start at that for a couple seconds, and it'll start to throttle the core clock again because it's thermal throttling. Memory clock offset, you could probably always underclock this. I don't think 6 gigahertz video RAM is really going to help or hinder performance if you underclock it. If anything, it'll maybe drop temperatures a little bit, draw less system power, because 6 gigahertz for this type of GPU is probably a little bit overkill. So just note that that's there. Let's go ahead and stop this. And I will show some gaming benchmarks as well in a separate video. I'm just going to do strictly a video presentation of benchmarks, so probably none of me talking, probably thank God, right? And so you can plow through those and get a feel for how well the system performs. Same thing with CPU benchmarks. There's only a couple that I ran on that. Monitor, see here, it's the LCD. Again, it says BOE, IPS, and what I did is I ran the Spider analysis, which Spider is a hardware and software tool that you can run on your LCD to, one, create a color profile so it's more accurate, but also gives an analysis of the display itself. You can see here the color gamut is 94% of our sRGB, 72% of Adobe RGB. And then on there, it doesn't do anything. NTSC, but it doesn't give me the details. So tone response, this doesn't mean anything to me, maybe it does to you, so I'll show it anyways. There's your tone response curve and your gray ramp. And then brightness and contrast. Oh, I wanted to bring up, see if I can find, pane look. Has details of LCDs, most all LCDs. So I did find this specific LCD on pane look, and you can see the details here. It is a 1080p Full HD panel. It is 300 nits of lumens and 800 to 1 contrast ratio. It states 30 millisecond response time. I don't believe that. I think it's faster than that, because 30 millisecond response time, games would be blurry as hell, and they seem to run just fine. So, and here it says 72% of NTSC, so seems pretty accurate. But you look at the luminance and the contrast ratio. The brightness at 100% brightness here, this chart here, is 254.8. So they claim 300. Here it's only 254.8, but 880 to 1 contrast. And they're claiming 800 to 1 contrast, a little bit better in that area. So overall, though, I think the panel is good. And it's good for general use. My eyes don't get fatigued. I've used it quite a bit. And it's also pretty decent for gaming as well. It is a 60 hertz panel as well, so halfway decent. Continuing on, drives, we have, as mentioned, the SanDisk X400 512 gig here. Let's see if I can find the crystal disk mark. There we go. Oops. You can see here's the performance, and you can see it's about 50% full. 450 megabyte per second read, 439.4 megabytes per second write. I didn't do anything special with this machine either. This is after I loaded it up with all the games and benchmarks, ran it for a little while, and I said, you know, I did to do a clean reboot. I did a optimization of the drives and a trim, and let it rest for a little bit. Then I did this benchmark, and this is what it came out as. Seems pretty typical for this kind of drive, but yeah, definitely say out of 3. Audio, oh yeah, audio is decent. Speakers are good, as noted before. The speakers are down facing, so it does tend to bounce off whatever surface it's sitting on, and could affect the audio quality a little bit, but they can get pretty loud, and they are not distorted at all. Network, 802.11 AC, ports, and battery. 50 watt hour battery. Here it says 48.856 milliwatt hour, so 48.9 watt hour. I haven't done a battery test yet, but I would think that this type of system should be able to go for a good at least 5 or 6 hours of basic computing. I don't know about gaming. I'm not sure that you really should game on laptops on battery anyways. It's going to drain the battery pretty quickly, but I guess that is an option, and maybe I'll do a separate battery test video as well. Okay, here is on the Asus UX430UN is the PC Mark 10 score. Not sure if it matters to anybody here, but here you have it: 3907, 7968 essentials, 6637 productivity, and 3062 digital content creation. Zoom that in a little bit maybe. And other than that, thank you for tuning in, and I hope to bring you some more information on this laptop. So far I'm loving it. I think it's a great performance for the cost, great capacity SSD, good LCD, comfortable to type on, so and actually can game. So until next time, thanks for tuning in.